My name is Eliza. For the first 32 years of my life, I believed my purpose was to be a source of quiet strength for others. I was the responsible older sister, the dependable wife, the steady friend. I lived in Havenwood, a small town nestled in a valley where roots run deep and memories linger in the air like the scent of pine after rain. My life with my husband, Mark, had settled into the comfortable, predictable rhythm of a long-married couple. He was a financial analyst, a man governed by logic and spreadsheets, and I was a freelance graphic designer, working from a small desk in a corner of our sun-drenched living room. Our love wasn't the fiery passion of a novel, it was a quiet, sturdy thing, or so I had convinced myself, built on 8 years of shared history and the gentle accumulation of daily routines. The story I need to tell begins on what was supposed to be the most joyful day our family had seen in years. My younger brother, Leo, was getting married. He was marrying Clara, a woman who seemed to have stepped directly from the pages of a storybook. She was luminous, with a smile that could disarm the most cynical heart and a grace that made everything she did seem effortless. Leo, my dear, earnest Leo, was utterly captivated by her, and watching his happiness bloom had been my greatest joy for the past year. Their love story felt like a balm to our family. College sweethearts who had found their way back to each other, they represented a kind of hopeful, faded romance that made even a pragmatist like me believe in destiny. Clara had a way of bringing out a confidence in Leo the first hadn't seen since he was a boy, encouraging him to leave his safe but unfulfilling office job to pursue his passion for woodworking. She'd helped him set up his small business, designing his logo and cheering him on at local craft fairs. When he proposed on a crisp autumn evening under a sky full of stars at our family's favorite lookout point, her tearful yes had felt like a promise of a beautiful future for all of us. Clara's family lived on the other side of the country, and with her mother's frail health preventing travel, I had gladly stepped into the role of de facto wedding planner. It became my project, my offering of love. We spent countless weekends poring over floral arrangements, tasting cakes until we were sick of sugar, and debating the merits of ivory versus champagne-colored linens. When Leo confessed that their budget was strained after an expensive repair on his workshop equipment, I quietly paid the balance for the string quartet Clara had dreamed of, framing it as my wedding gift to them both. Every detail had been polished to perfection. The ceremony was set for noon at St. Jude's Chapel, the historic stone church where generations of Havenwood residents had marked their life's most significant moments. The reception was to follow at the Orchard View Hall, a rustic barn with sprawling views of the valley, which we planned to fill with wildflowers and hundreds of twinkling fairy lights. I had been there with Clara when she found her gown at a small boutique, a simple, elegant sheath of ivory silk. I had watched her cry with joy as she saw her reflection, and in that moment, my heart had ached with happiness for her, for my brother. But now, standing in my bathroom, the carefully constructed perfection of the day began to fracture. It was just past 8 in the morning. My hair was styled in soft waves from a salon appointment the day before, and my navy maid of honor dress hung pressed and ready on the back of the door. The air was still and quiet, filled with the hum of anticipation. And then my phone buzzed on the marble countertop. An unknown number. A single, chilling message. Don't go to the wedding. Check your husband's garage. You need to see this before it's too late. My first reaction was dismissal. A cruel prank. Someone's idea of a twisted joke on a day that meant so much to so many. I placed the mascara wand I was holding back on the counter, my hand trembling slightly. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, her face pale, her eyes wide with an uncertainty that had no place on a day of celebration. The warm, bubbling excitement that had woken me at dawn had evaporated, replaced by a cold, heavy dread that settled in my chest like a stone. Another buzz. This time, it was my mother. Eliza, honey, don't forget the boutonnieres at the florist. Leo is a bundle of nerves and keeps asking if everything is ready. The normalcy of her text was jarring, a dispatch from a world that no longer felt real. I tried to continue my routine, The familiar steps of applying makeup, a desperate grasp at control. Foundation, concealer, blush. But my hands shook and I smudged my eyeliner twice. The woman in the mirror looked the part of a maid of honor, but her eyes held a new, dark knowledge. Mark had left unusually early that morning, around 7. He'd kissed my cheek distractedly, his explanation vague. Just have to tie up a few loose ends at the office before the ceremony, he'd said. I hadn't thought twice about it. His job often demanded odd hours, late nights, and weekend crises. Our marriage had long ago made peace with his schedule. But now his haste felt suspicious. I replayed his departure in my mind, his untouched coffee on the counter, the way he'd paced the kitchen, glancing repeatedly at his phone. The forced smile he'd given me when I asked if everything was all right. Everything's fine, Liz. Just a stressful project. Everything was not fine. A deep, primal instinct, a quiet voice I had learned over the years to trust, whispered that this was not a prank. This was a warning. The key to the detached garage was in a small ceramic dish on my dresser, amongst forgotten earrings and a tangled silver chain. Mark had insisted I have a key just in case, though I'd never once had a reason to use it. Now, the small, cold piece of metal felt impossibly heavy in my palm. I stood in the center of my bedroom, fully dressed for a wedding that might never happen, caught in a silent, agonizing debate. I could delete the message, dismiss it as malicious nonsense, and focus on being the supportive sister Leo needed. I could choose the path of willful ignorance, preserving the fragile peace of the day. Or I could walk across the manicured lawn to that unassuming garage and risk unearthing a truth that could shatter everything. The clock on my nightstand read 8:45 a.m. The ceremony was at noon. There was time. Time to look, and time to still make it to the church, assuming all I found were lawn tools and old holiday decorations. But as I walked towards the back door, the key clutched in my sweating hand, I felt a profound and terrifying certainty. I was about to open a door, and on the other side, my life as I knew it was waiting to end. The garage door opened with a familiar, low groan. Morning sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dancing dust motes and casting long, stark shadows across the concrete floor. My eyes scanned the space, taking in the predictable landscape of our shared life. Mark's meticulously maintained vintage convertible covered by a soft gray tarp, metal shelves lined with neatly labeled plastic bins, the lingering scent of motor oil, sawdust, and damp earth. For a moment, a wave of profound relief washed over me. It was all just as it should be. The lawnmower in its designated corner. Our camping gear, unused for years, gathering a fine layer of dust on a high shelf. Old paint cans stacked in a neat pyramid. I almost laughed out loud at my own paranoia. Here I was, in my formal dress and salon-styled hair, playing detective because of a random text message. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. I pictured telling Mark about this later, the two of us shaking our heads at the cruelty of whoever had tried to sow chaos on such an important day. But as I turned to leave, my gaze snagged on something out of place. Tucked behind a stack of gardening supplies, partially obscured by an old, plaid blanket I didn't recognize, was a vintage leather suitcase. It was a handsome piece, the kind you might see in an old film, dark, scuffed leather with tarnished brass latches. It was not ours. Its presence felt like a deliberate intrusion, a foreign object in the museum of our life. My heart resumed its frantic, panicked rhythm. I moved towards it, my silk dress whispering against the dusty floor. I pulled the blanket away. The suitcase was unlocked. With trembling fingers, I lifted the heavy lid. The contents stole the air from my lungs. It was a curated collection of a woman's life, and none of it was mine. On top lay a delicate silk scarf, patterned with soft, watercolor poppies. Beneath it, a small bottle of expensive perfume, a niche brand Clara had once mentioned she adored. A book of poetry by Rilke, its cover worn, with a passage underlined in a delicate, feminine hand. And then I saw the jewelry. A silver locket on a fine chain. I opened it. Inside was a tiny, professionally shot photograph of Mark smiling. My hands shook as I dug deeper, driven by a horrified fascination. And then I found the photographs. A thick stack of them, bound by a rubber band. The first one I saw made my blood run cold. It was Mark and Clara, standing on a sun-drenched beach I had never been to. His arm was wrapped tightly around her waist, his hand resting possessively on her hip. Her head was tilted back in laughter, her eyes sparkling with an adoration I hadn't seen directed at me in years. They were not friends. They were lovers, radiant and shamelessly happy. With a growing sense of nausea, I flipped through the rest. Mark and Clara sharing a bottle of wine at a rustic cafe, their heads bent close together in intimate conversation. Clara, wearing one of Mark's sweaters, curled up on a sofa in an apartment I didn't recognize. A selfie of the two of them in a forest, autumn leaves like confetti in their hair, their cheeks flushed from the cold. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a life. A secret, parallel life, lived in the shadows of their public ones. How long? The question echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of the garage. How many times had Clara sat at my kitchen table, her expression earnest and grateful as we discussed her wedding, all while she was sleeping with my husband? How many late nights had Mark blamed on work emergencies when he had been with her? The kindness I had shown her, the support I had offered, the money I had spent, it all felt like a grand, humiliating joke. Beneath the photographs was the final, most damning piece of evidence. A sheaf of printed emails and text message conversations. The paper was still slightly crisp. I recognized Mark's email address and phone number instantly. The dates were recent. Some were from the night before. Clara, I can't do this much longer. Pretending with him is tearing me apart. Mark, just a few more hours, my love. Stay strong. After the wedding, we can start to figure it out. This marriage is just a means to an end. Clara, I feel so guilty. He's so good to me. Mark, he's providing you with a foundation. Once you're legally his wife, you'll have the stability we need to build our real future together. He won't have to know. Think of it as a business arrangement. Clara, I love you. Not him. I have to keep reminding myself of that. Mark, I love you too. I'll be at the reception, watching you. After it's over, I'll tell Eliza I'm helping the caterers clean up. Meet me at the old spot by the river. We can finally be together. I sank to my knees on the cold concrete, the printed pages fluttering from my numb fingers. They weren't just having an affair. They were conspirators. This wedding wasn't a celebration of love, it was a cold, calculated transaction. A fraud. Clara was using my kind, trusting brother for financial security, for a foundation, while planning to continue her life with my husband the moment the ink was dry on the marriage certificate. The garage, once a place of familiar clutter, now felt like a tomb. A vault where the evidence of the most profound betrayal I could imagine had been laid to rest. The clock on my phone read 9:30 a.m. In 2.5 hours, Leo would stand at the altar, ready to pledge his life to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone. Someone had sent me that text. Someone knew. Someone wanted me to find this, to stop this. And now, the responsibility was mine. My first impulse was pure, white-hot rage. I wanted to drive to the bridal suite where Clara was getting ready, to throw these photos at her feet, to expose her in front of everyone. I wanted to scream and cry and shatter the perfect illusion she had so carefully constructed. But as I knelt there, surrounded by the debris of 2 broken marriages, a different instinct took over. The fire of my rage cooled into something harder, sharper. Ice. Acting on emotion would be a mistake. They would twist it. They would paint me as the hysterical, jealous sister-in-law, a woman unhinged by her own failing marriage. Eliza's always been a bit unstable. She fabricated this to ruin our happiness. They could gaslight Leo, confuse him, and in the chaos, they might still win. No, I would not let them. My pain was a weapon, and I needed to wield it with precision. My hands, which had been shaking uncontrollably, were now steady. I pulled out my phone and, with a chilling sense of purpose, began to photograph everything. Each click of the camera was a small act of reclamation. The photo of them on the beach. The selfie in the autumn forest. The intimate shot at the cafe. I captured the text messages, ensuring the timestamps and Mark's number were clearly visible. I photographed the locket, the perfume, the underlined passage in the book of poetry. I was no longer a victim of their deceit. I was the curator of its exposure. When I was finished, I meticulously returned every item to its place. The photos back in their stack, the jewelry nestled in the silk scarf, the printed messages folded neatly at the bottom. The suitcase was closed, the latches secured, and placed back behind the gardening supplies, the plaid blanket draped over it just so. No one could know I had been here. The element of surprise was the only advantage Leo had. I pulled the garage door shut, the groan echoing in the quiet morning. I locked it and slid the key into the pocket of my dress. Walking back to the house, I caught my reflection in the living room window. I looked the same. The same navy dress, the same soft waves in my hair, the same understated pearl earrings. But my eyes were different. They were the eyes of a woman who had seen the truth and who was now prepared to go to war for her family. The drive to my parents' house, where Leo was getting ready, was a journey through a landscape of lies. Every landmark held a new, bitter significance. The corner bakery where Leo and Clara had their first date. The park where he'd proposed. The little florist shop where I was supposed to be picking up the boutonnieres. It had all been a stage, and Clara had been giving the performance of a lifetime. My phone buzzed again. It was my mother. "Leo's really getting anxious, honey. Can you come calm him down?" The irony was a physical ache in my chest. She was asking me to soothe my brother's wedding day jitters, unaware that I was carrying the evidence that would shatter his world. At a red light, I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I practiced breathing. Deep in, slow out. I could not be the emotional wreck I felt inside. Leo would need me to be his rock. He would need my strength, my clarity. The photos and messages on my phone felt like a volatile explosive, capable of either saving him or leveling our entire family. I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home and took a moment to compose myself. Through the upstairs window, I could see Leo's silhouette as he paced his old bedroom. He looked so hopeful, so ready for this new chapter, utterly oblivious to the fact that his storybook romance was a carefully crafted deception. Taking one last, fortifying breath, I got out of the car. The moment I walked through that front door and spoke the truth, nothing would ever be the same. The door swung open before my hand reached the knob. My mother stood there, her face aglow with a pure, maternal joy that broke my heart. "Eliza." Perfect timing. He's up there, driving me crazy with his pacing. I think he needs his big sister. I managed a weak smile and climbed the stairs, each step a leaden weight. The hallway was a gallery of our shared past, school photos, vacation snapshots, a picture of Leo and me as gap-toothed children building a lopsided snowman. It all belonged to a simpler, more innocent time. I paused outside his bedroom door, gathering the last of my courage. I knocked softly. "Come in." Leo stood before his childhood mirror, fumbling with his bow tie. He looked so handsome in his tailored gray suit, more a man than the boy I still saw in him. His face broke into a relieved grin when he saw me. "Liz, thank God. I can't get this stupid thing straight, and Mom starts crying every time she looks at me. I swear I'm going to be sick before we even get to the chapel." His easy, unburdened happiness was a dagger to my soul. I closed the door behind me, the soft click sealing us into our new, terrible reality. "Leo," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I need to show you something. And I need you to sit down first." The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of confusion and then alarm. "What's wrong? You look like you've just seen a ghost." In a way, I had. The ghost of our family's future. "I need you to promise me you'll stay as calm as you can," I said, my voice gaining strength. I held out my phone, the screen illuminated with the first photograph I'd taken in the garage, Mark and Clara on the beach, locked in a lover's embrace. Leo stared at the screen, his mind trying to process the impossible image. I watched his expression shift through a rapid, devastating sequence: confusion, disbelief, a flicker of pained recognition, and finally, a dawning, soul-crushing comprehension. What is this?" he breathed, his voice hollow. "I found it this morning." "In Mark's garage," I said gently. "Someone sent me a message. A warning." I swiped to the next photo and the next. "There are dozens of them, Leo." His hand trembled as he took the phone from me, his thumb scrolling through a gallery of his own betrayal. I saw my brother's world disintegrate in real time, each image a wrecking ball to the foundations of his happiness. "How long?" The words were choked raw. "I don't know. Months, maybe longer." The photos seemed to span all seasons. I sat beside him on the edge of his bed, the same spot where I had comforted him after scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. "Leo, there's more. I found messages. They're plans." I showed him the screenshots of the emails, watching his eyes scan the words that laid their conspiracy bare. Clara's admission that the marriage was a means to an end. Their plan to be together after the wedding. Mark's cold, calculated description of their marriage as a business arrangement. He finally looked up from the phone, his eyes vacant. "She never loved me," he said, not as a question, but as a flat, dead statement of fact. "The whole time she was just using me." "I'm so sorry, Leo," I whispered, my own tears finally breaking free. "I am so sorry." He was silent for a long time, staring at the wall, at the sports pennants from his high school days, relics of a boy who believed in happy endings. Then he looked at me, and I saw the hurt in his eyes warring with something else, something hard and resolute. "What do we do now?" The question steadied me. I had expected rage or denial or a complete collapse. Instead, he was asking for a strategy. He was a fighter. "We have choices," I said, my voice low and even. "We can call it off quietly. Tell everyone there's been a family emergency. Confront them in private." I paused. "Or we can let the truth come out. We can let everyone who came here to celebrate this lie see exactly who Clara is." He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the quiet, tree-lined street of our childhood. "She was going to go through with it," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "She was actually going to stand there and say those vows to me. And then meet my husband by the river tonight," I added softly. He turned back to me, and the look on his face was one I had never seen before. It was a cold, quiet fury that made him seem 10 years older. "She deserves for this to happen in front of everyone. She wanted an audience for her wedding. She can have one for this too." "Are you sure, Leo?" "Once we do this, there is no going back. She made her choice when she decided to betray me," he said, his jaw tight. He straightened his shoulders, adjusting the bow tie that now seemed like part of a costume for a tragic play. "Tell me the plan." We spent the next half-hour coordinating. He would let the ceremony proceed until the officiant asked for objections. He would be the one to speak. I would remain in the front pew, phone in hand, ready to corroborate his story with irrefutable proof if Clara tried to deny it. We were no longer just a brother and sister. We were allies, united against a common enemy. As we prepared to leave for the chapel, a strange calm settled over us. The initial shock had crystallized into a shared, focused resolve. Leo adjusted his bow tie one last time in the mirror. He was no longer a nervous groom. He was a soldier, preparing for a battle he never asked for, but one he was determined not to lose. "Ready?" I asked. He met my gaze in the reflection, his eyes clear and steady. "Let's go end this." The short drive to St. Jude's Chapel felt like moving through a dream. Leo sat beside me, preternaturally composed, while our parents followed in their car, blissfully ignorant, chatting about the beautiful weather and the relatives they were excited to see. "We can still turn back," I said softly as we pulled into the crowded parking lot. "We can just go home." "No," Leo said, his voice firm. "She built this stage. She's going to have to perform on it." The old stone chapel was a picture of bucolic charm. White ribbons adorned the ancient wooden doors, and guests milled about on the lawn, their cheerful chatter floating on the warm afternoon air. My stomach churned. They had all come to witness a union of love, and were instead about to become spectators at an execution. Inside, the sanctuary was breathtaking. Clara's vision had been perfectly realized. Wildflowers and eucalyptus overflowed from vases, their fresh, green scent filling the air. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns on the stone floor. It was beautiful, and it was all a lie. I took my seat in the front pew, smoothing my dress and placing my phone in my lap. Our family filled the rows around me, their faces beaming with anticipation. Leo's college friends, who had driven halfway across the country, waved at him. Clara's small contingent of family and friends smiled warmly. The processional music began, a gentle melody from the string quartet I had paid for. Leo walked down the aisle with my mother on his arm. He looked dignified and composed, but I could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the muscle working in his jaw. As he passed my pew, his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. I gave him the slightest of nods. "I'm here. We're in this together." He took his place at the altar before Pastor Mike, the kind, gentle man who had baptized us both. Then, the music swelled and all heads turned. Clara appeared at the back of the church. She was radiant, an ethereal vision in her simple silk gown. Her veil floated around her like a soft cloud, and the bouquet of wildflowers in her hands trembled slightly. She was the perfect bride, the perfect actress. The sheer audacity of her performance was staggering. Her eyes were fixed on Leo as she walked down the aisle, her smile unwavering. She looked happy in love, on the cusp of her forever. I watched her, and I felt nothing but a cold, profound pity for the emptiness inside her. She reached the altar and took Leo's hands. Pastor Mike began the ceremony with his familiar, warm words about the sanctity of marriage, about the sacred commitment they were about to make. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. "We are gathered here today," the pastor began, "to witness and celebrate the joining of Leo and Clara in holy matrimony." The ceremony proceeded. There were readings, promises, and talk of unconditional love. Clara squeezed Leo's hands, likely mistaking his stillness for nerves. And then came the moment we had been waiting for. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional, pregnant pause filled the church. Guests shifted in their seats, expecting the silence to be broken by the pastor's voice. Instead, it was broken by my brothers. "I do," Leo said. His voice was not loud, but it was perfectly clear, and it sliced through the silence like a shard of glass. A collective, audible gasp swept through the congregation. Whispers erupted. Heads turned. Clara's face, which had been a mask of serene joy, went white with shock. "Leo, what are you doing?" she hissed, her smile frozen in a grotesque parody of happiness. "I have a reason," Leo said, turning to face her fully, his voice resonating through the suddenly silent church. "I object to marrying a woman who has been having a long-term affair with my sister's husband." The silence that followed was absolute. 300 people sat frozen, their minds reeling. Pastor Mike looked utterly bewildered, his mouth slightly agape. Clara's composure shattered. "That's not true," she cried, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. Her desperate eyes darted around, finally landing on me with a look of pure venom. "This is Eliza's doing. She's always been jealous. She's making this up to ruin my life." But Leo was prepared. He calmly took out his own phone, which I had loaded with the evidence. He held up the screen, showing the picture of her and Mark on the beach. "Did Eliza make this up, Clara? Did she fabricate the text messages from last night, where you and Mark planned your future together after you married me for my stability?" Her denials sputtered and died. The truth was there, undeniable, reflected in the horrified faces of the guests and the cold, steady gaze of the man she had so callously betrayed. "Fine," she finally shrieked, her mask of perfection completely gone, revealing the ugly, desperate person beneath. "Yes, we were together. But I chose you. I'm here, aren't I? I was going to be a good wife. Your plan was to meet him by the river tonight, Leo said, his voice quiet but devastating. This wedding was a lie. You are a lie. That was the final blow. With a wild, guttural scream of pure rage and humiliation, Clara ripped the delicate veil from her hair and threw the beautiful bouquet of wildflowers to the floor. She turned and fled, storming back down the aisle, her silk gown trailing behind her like the wreckage of her own deception. The heavy wooden doors of the chapel slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing the final, brutal end of everything. The chapel emptied in a slow, dazed procession. Guests filed out in hushed, bewildered clusters, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid fascination. The beautiful wedding had become the town's most scandalous piece of gossip in a single, shattering moment. I was standing with Leo near the altar, helping him remove the now meaningless boutonniere from his lapel, when my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. My stomach tightened. Eliza, what the hell is going on? His voice was tight with feigned confusion. Clara just called me, hysterical. Said the wedding is off. She wasn't making any sense. I'm sure she wasn't, I replied, my voice as calm and cool as the stone walls around us. Where are you? I was just finishing up at the office, about to head to the reception. The lie was so effortless, so practiced. You should come to the chapel, Mark, I said. We need to talk. He arrived 20 minutes later, his face a mask of concern. But the moment he walked into the empty sanctuary and saw me, Leo, and my parents standing together like a united, formidable front, he knew the game was over. You ruined everything, he said, his voice hollow, his accusation directed at me. No, Mark, I said, surprised by the complete absence of emotion in my voice. It was as if a switch had been flipped. You did that. You did that when you started a relationship with my brother's fiancé. You did it every time you lied to me. You did it when you conspired with her to use my family for your own selfish desires. His justifications were weak and pathetic. He claimed I'd misunderstood, that the affair was over, that he'd been trying to protect me. But the guilt was etched into every line on his face. He never once apologized to Leo. He never acknowledged the depth of the pain he had caused. His only concern was for his own shattered image. That evening, he packed a bag and left. I watched from the living room window as his car disappeared down the street, and the only thing I felt was a profound, cleansing relief. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet sorrow and gradual healing. The legal dissolution of my marriage was an administrative process, a series of signatures that felt more like a release than a loss. Leo moved back into his childhood bedroom for a while, and in a strange way, we healed together. We spent long evenings on our parents' porch swing, just as we had as children, talking, or sometimes just sitting in a comfortable silence as the fireflies began their nightly dance. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust someone again, he admitted one night, his voice quiet. You will, I assured him, my own heart beginning to mend. But you'll be wiser. You'll trust your instincts. You've learned a hard lesson, but you've also been saved from a life of deceit. Not everyone is Clara. How are you so calm about all this? He asked, looking at me with genuine curiosity. Your marriage ended, too. I thought for a moment, watching the stars begin to appear in the deepening twilight. My marriage was already over, I said, the truth of it landing with peaceful certainty. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. Mark's betrayal wasn't the sickness, it was just the symptom. Now, at least, I can build something real. On my own. Our family, the true, steadfast heart of our lives, closed ranks around us. Aunts, uncles, and cousins called, not with gossip, but with offers of support. In the aftermath, several people admitted they'd had a quiet unease about Clara. She always seemed to be playing a part, my father said, shaking his head. Too perfect. The spaces in my house where Mark's things used to be no longer felt empty, they felt full of potential. I reclaimed his home office and turned it back into the art studio I had given up years ago. I set up my easel by the large window and began to paint again. The first canvas was a swirl of deep, turbulent blues and brilliant, defiant gold, the colors of my pain and my liberation. Word eventually trickled back to us that Clara and Mark's great, tragic love story, born of secrets and lies, could not survive the harsh light of exposure. Without the thrill of deception to bind them, their connection withered. Clara moved out of state. Mark took a job transfer to the West Coast. They simply faded away, two ghosts haunting a past I was determined to leave behind. My revenge was not loud or fiery. It was quiet, precise, and absolute. It was the simple, unassailable power of the truth. The greatest victory was not in their downfall, but in our freedom. The freedom for Leo to find a love that was honest and true, and the freedom for me to rediscover myself, not as someone's wife or sister, but simply as Eliza. A woman who had learned to trust the quiet voice inside her, a woman who was finally painting her own life, in her own colors, on her own terms. And as I stood in my sunlit studio, I knew, with a gratitude that filled my entire being, that I had never been more whole.